If you don't have a signed agreement, legally you're responsible to make sure they do not suffer damages by virtue of working with you. Hi there, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Conscious Counsel podcast with your host, Cory Sterling. That's me. I hope wherever you are in the world that you're safe, that you're having fun, and that you're ready for an informative Conscious Counsel podcast episode. As always, the promise, the reason why I take time to record these podcasts is because I want to give you the information and tell you the stories that will help you protect and grow your wellness business with both confidence and clarity. It's real. The law is a real thing. The legal issues are very real. I go through it every week with my clients, and I want to give you the information so that you can protect and grow your wellness business with confidence and clarity. Boom, let's do it. This week, I'm going to talk about waivers of liability and the importance of making sure that the waiver covers all the different activities that you facilitate. And I'm going to tell a story about something I went through with one of my clients this week. And essentially, I'm going to start by explaining what a waiver does, why it's important, and some specific nuances to it. And then I'm going to tell you the story that I went through with my client, and we're going to take it from there. Okay, so waivers of liability are different than other sorts of legal documents because it is a document where someone is agreeing not to hold you legally responsible in the event that they suffer damages or get hurt when participating in an activity that you facilitate. So the way that it works at law is if nobody signs anything and someone comes to your class, works with you for coaching, if there's any activity that you're facilitating for this person and they suffer damages, they get hurt, they act on advice that you give them, and as a result, lose a lot of money, whatever it is, at law, you have something called a duty of care to make sure that when you're facilitating activities for someone, that they do not suffer damages. And if nothing is written between the parties, liability is crystal clear. You're the teacher, they're the student. You're the studio, they're the student. You're the coach, they're the student. Whatever it is, if you don't have a signed agreement, legally you're responsible to make sure they do not suffer damages by virtue of working with you. Now, what happens with waivers of liability is it's a document that you get someone to sign that says, hey, I'm going to lead you in these activities. And in exchange for me agreeing to lead you in these activities and to offer my services to you, you agree not to hold me or my business legally responsible in the event that you suffer some form of damages. So if you're running a retreat, people sign a retreat waiver, which says, cool, I'm going to be going to Costa Rica with you. I'm going to paddleboard. I'm going to swim. I'm going to surf. I'm going to do yoga. I'm going to hike. I'm going to do all of these things. And as the business owner, as the retreat organizer, I'm only going to let you participate in these activities if you agree not to hold me legally responsible in the event that any of the activities that we do together or any of the risks that we outline in this waiver of liability, if any of those risks materialize, you agree not to hold us legally responsible. And that is allowed. And it's the same with a Pilates studio, with a yoga studio, with a gym, with coaching. It's just a document that says, hey, otherwise you would be allowed to sue me. But because I've been so clear in telling you what we're doing together, how we're doing it together, what the risks are, what equipment we're going to be using, all of those sorts of details, you agree not to hold me legally responsible. And that's a condition for us working together. Awesome. We're there. This is how waivers of liability work. One quick point about waivers of liability that's really, really important, and this is a mistake I see a lot of clients who come to us make. A lot of the times they'll put the waiver of liability in a service agreement, or they'll put the waiver of liability with their privacy policy or with their media release or another agreement. Waivers of liability should always be separate from other agreements because they have to do with the relinquishment of legal rights. And most of the other agreements have to do with covenants or promises made between parties. So as an example, you have a studio, you have a membership agreement. It outlines all of the terms. It has the click to cancel rules for recurring payments. It has behavioral expectations. It has all of those sorts of things. But it should not have the waiver of liability because all of the things that are in a studio membership agreement, none of them have anything to do with signing away legal rights, which the law and government and courts take very seriously. Whereas the waiver of liability, it's very clear the intention of the document is for someone to forfeit legal rights they would otherwise have. So that's one nuance. Okay, now the story for this week that's going to make a lot of sense to you and give you a lot of clarity on waivers of liability and what needs to be included. I have a client of mine in the state of Texas who was running a free event for the community. Awesome. This client also has a yoga studio. So they have a yoga studio and they were doing a collaboration with another gym in town and they wanted to put on a free event for their community in Texas. Awesome. I love it. I'm all about it. They were doing it outside at a really cool space and they put the event on Eventbrite and they were supposed to have the waiver of liability included in the checkout before someone could participate. They forgot, didn't get done. It's really important to make sure that those things get done. The event takes place, and now here's something that's really important. Half of the event was yoga run by my client. Half of the event was another activity run by the studio that they were running the event with. And I think it was CrossFit. I forget specifically what it was, but it was some sort of gym activity that was not the core. It was not yoga. It wasn't my client's a yoga studio. And the person they were doing the collaboration with offers some other type of physical activity with other equipment and other activities and all sorts of stuff. They're at the event. Awesome. It's there. We're doing it for free. We love the community. Everything's great. It was windy. There were some mirrors that were blowing in the wind, and one of the mirrors fell off, hit one of the participants who was in Shavasana, cut their head, and they started bleeding everywhere. And they had to call an ambulance, and the person had to be taken away. Very, very serious. Obviously, my client calls me and is concerned, and the first thing that my client did was sign up for a Conscious Counsel Plus membership. So now we're talking all the time. However many consultations are required, whatever support is needed, I'm there for them. But this is where my client went wrong. Firstly, they didn't tell me that they were doing this. So if you're listening to this and you're a client and you're doing different things outside the normal scope of your business, please just drop me a line and let me know what you're doing so I can make sure you're protected. Secondly, the problem was, what my client said to me was, well, at my yoga studio, this person has signed our yoga studio waiver of liability. And what we drafted for them was a studio waiver of liability. It wasn't for a waiver of liability for physical activities taking place in public spaces or outside of the studio. So A, the risks of the location were not included. B, the equipment like hanging mirrors was not included in the waiver of liability. And C, whatever activities they were doing with the other person, the other studio, fitness studio that was co-hosting the event, was not included in the waiver of liability anyway. So if they were using weights, if they were using kettlebells, if they were using elastic bands, if they were using any of those sorts of things that normally aren't in a yoga class or in a yoga studio, they wouldn't be covered. And thankfully, so far, we haven't heard anything about the person who got injured. And again, my client didn't even have waivers of liability signed for the event. So it's an example where a lot of things were not done correctly. And so I'm just going to share a little bit about what should be done correctly in this situation to make sure that you're protected. So firstly, you have your documents for your core functions. Let's say you're a retreat organizer. Awesome. Run your retreats, do your retreats, make sure all the activities, everything's included for that. Let's say you're a studio owner. You have your documents. Cool. Offer your classes in studio. You're totally covered for all of that stuff. In the event you're going to do something outside the normal scope of your services, make sure that the waiver of liability covers that. So in a best case scenario, this client would have said, hey, Cory, I'm doing a series of free events for the community, and I want to have people sign my waiver of liability. What does that look like? And so the questions that I would ask would be, where are you doing this? What other activities are you doing? What other equipment is there? What other risks might be involved in doing this in public places or in someone else's studio or whatever it is? Because ideally, the waiver of liability has to cover, just remember, at law, you have a duty of care. You facilitate the services. You're putting on this event. If someone comes and gets hurt, you're responsible. They can sign a waiver of liability, which means you're not responsible, but only if the waiver covers specifically what activities you're doing, the risks of those activities, what equipment's being used, and all of everything related to that. So in a best case scenario, how I wish this would have unfolded is my client said, hey, Cory, we're doing a series of community events. I'd say, cool, let's hop on a call. Where are you doing it? What other activities are you doing? Are they doing anything other than yoga? Are they using weights? What is the venue like? What sort of risks might be in the venue? And we would take it from there. And then I would update or, do a tune-up for the waiver of liability to make sure they're protected with all of that. So it's a very real situation. This is what happens in my legal practice. Unfortunately, accidents happen and the risks are very real. And in this situation, unfortunately, my client would be liable. We're fingers crossed that the issue's over and nothing else happens, but it's a very real situation of an example where things go wrong, where we don't think that things could go wrong, but they do. And legally, you want to make sure that your documents cover everything that your business does and exactly how you operate and what the risks are and what equipment. So just summing all of this up, a waiver of liability is a document that can be used for someone to forfeit legal rights to bring a legal action against you. However, that agreement will only stand A, if it's separate than the other agreements that they're signing, like a service agreement or a media release or whatever else it is. And B, the waiver of liability has to be specific to the activities, the equipment, the risk, the location, all of that information. Even if they use the studio waiver, but the activities were taking place outside of the studio, the person who gets injured would have a good argument about why the waiver should not apply. So I want the waiver to apply. I want you to be protected. I want everyone who's in my community to be protected and do things properly. And that's why I take time to record these episodes. If you've enjoyed this episode, feel free to share with a friend, pass it along, subscribe to the podcast. And whatever it is that you do, make sure you work with a lawyer who loves you. Have a wonderful week.